So we're going to go to environments, and then we're going to open that up, and we're going to look through what we have here. Now, for the most part, the assets that we're going to be building from are in the planes section, and then you'll see within planes we have planes ruins, static mesh. So I'm going to go back to my place mode, or hit Shift 1, and ideally whenever I do this kind of stuff, I want to have a good idea of what I'm going to be creating, but also a good center point. Now, within this environment, we're going to have rocks kind of decorating the outside, and we're going to have a reasonably large ruins section that's going to be on this inside. And I personally kind of want to get a single asset that I'm going to be building everything else around, just so I've got a nice focal point for how I'm proceeding. So to do that, I'm going to get this SM Planes castle fountain, and I'm going to drop that in. Because the other thing is that I know how tall this is relative to any person going in the map. A person within this planes is now going to be roughly at head height with the base of the fountain if they're a short person. So I'm going to use that as kind of like part of my scale reference for the rest of what we're doing. So I've dropped this in, and the first thing I'm going to do is get a good idea of how this is sitting within the ground. So we've placed this all through, but I think it'd be a good idea for me to go to my landscape and kind of cut back some of the grass around here and add it in again later. So I'm just going to shift click around here and bring it back to being just dirt for the time being, and I'm going to build off of that and then add the dirt back in as I see fit. So we've got that in there. I'm next going to have a general upper structure that's going to be running around this area here. So we're going to go through and kind of add some platforms in there. One of the good assets for this is the planes blocks that are floating around. So if I go to the floors section, so just up here, static mesh, you can see that we have quite a few assets that are in there that we can use for floors. Now the one that I'm going to use as my standard base is going to be this one here. So I'm going to set this up, and then I'm going to kind of move backwards from that. This is going to be the initial place that's going to have everything else and be the fundamental foundations for the environment. And then I'm going to go back from that and work out how that would then be structured and what would have to be there to support it. So initially I've got this in place. At this point, I've realized that my snap grid is set to 1. I'm going to crank this up to 100, and I'm quickly going to set these numbers to the nearest 100, because it's a good idea when developing these to have them in a position that's actually going to work to the snap grid. Again, negative 1000, negative 4000, and zero it out. Okay, negative 30 is probably okay for that one. So we've got this, we've got our basic environment set up. Now we've got to work out how we want this to be placed. Now essentially these blocks are going to be kind of built around the outside. However, we do have a bit of an issue with this asset, and I'll show you what that is. If I look at this asset, I can actually see that its approximate size is 772 by 772 by 126. Now I can live with a height of 126, that's fine, but 772 is kind of an arbitrary size. Realistically, I want this to be something that actually scales well to a snap grid that I can work with. So I've already run the numbers, and I know that if I multiply it by 1.032, I'm going to end up with something that is going to snap a bit better. You can see here that that's, if I do an alt drag, I know that these blocks are now going to be flush up against one another. Oops, I hit H. I know that these blocks will now be flush up against one another if I do 1.032. So that just gets me to the nearest 100 unit snap grid, which is a good place for me to start. So we've got this asset in, and I'm going to just place a couple of these to form a general perimeter, and then we'll do some staircases to kind of tie them together. Now I think it's a good idea for us to do, say, 5 going up, with a basic square being about 3 here. So this is going to be like a mini courtyard that's going to sit, at which point I'm going to have a larger castle-y section over here, and that's going to have a bit of this in front of it as well. So I'm going to block this out and go alt drag, there we go, 4, 5, going to drag these across. Now I think as far as the width of this area goes, I'm going to stick to let's have a look at this. Thinking perhaps 2 blocks across might be alright. It's a reasonably large area still, keeping in mind how tall a person is. So 2 blocks across will be good, at which point the third block is going to go back down the same as these did. So this is going to be my base courtyard. At which point when we get down to here, I'm going to have just one set running across. So my environment's going to be kind of based around this. And from here, what we're going to need to do is work out how we want to have players able to cross through the courtyard, where we want certain assets, and how we want to structure this castle that we're building. So I've got this in here as a quick base, but from here, let's look at what else we need to actually do. I think it's a good idea to go ahead and raise these up. So I've clicked on one and I've hit Shift E to select all of the same type. And I'm actually going to push this up by about 1 meter, because I want this to be a reasonably low area. Sorry, a reasonably high area here, but a low area in the middle. And the next thing that I'm going to need to do is I'm going to add a staircase. So the staircase asset is within your floors section. You'll see that we have it just here. And by default, the stairs come up to about there. I'm just going to set the Z height to be about 1.5. So 90 degrees. Now I'm actually okay with these coming a little below the rim, because even though they don't match up flush with it, it'll seem like the next bit there is actually intended to be a bit of a step. If anything, I probably want to lower this down, so I'm going to set my snap to about 10 until we get a bit closer to the ground and what looks like a consistent step height between here, here, here. Seems good. 100. So this is going to be sitting down about... Fountain's going to go up here. Let's do that. Let's get this here. Again, it doesn't matter if you're exactly matching what I'm doing, as long as you're getting a general idea of how I'm getting to that point, so you can create your own variant of it. I'm going to line this up. Now, one thing that we've just encountered is that, again, because this is kind of in an unusual sizing, what's happening is it's not matching up. So this wouldn't be directly across. However, I can get this. I can Alt drag, and then I can right click and hit Transform Mirror on X. At which point they will match up perfectly with one another, and we've created an environment that kind of looks like this. It's at this point that I'm thinking it might be a good idea for us to widen up the area a little bit, so it goes a little bit further on. So I might move these out by 1 tile. So I'm just going to pop it. I believe that's correct. Yeah, I think this will be a bit nicer. Slightly wider area, but that's okay. And I'll now reposition this to be in the center again. So we've now got a basic area that is going to be set up for this. And now what I need to do is kind of go out and set up some walls to kind of fill in these gaps just here. And there's a whole heap of these walls in the ruins folder, so I'm going to go back to that. Static meshes. And you can see that there's a bunch of different types here. The one that I think is probably going to work the best for us is going to be the bridge wall. So if I type into here, bridge, you can see we've got this. Now when you first drag it in, the pivot point's all the way down there. So it's going to look a little bit unusual. But when you position it correctly, we can start getting something together. So I'm going to initially place this here. I'm going to have this other one over here, and I'm going to have pillars on these corners. So I'm more concerned about where this ends up relative to the staircase itself, rather than where this ends up relative to the corners, because I think it'll be covered by this. So I'm going to drop it down, say 50 units. There we go, pull it out so it touches the edge there. I think that looks nice. Once again, I'm going to control click, go here. Just going to mirror it on the X. I'm going to pull it across. Fantastic. Okay, so we've got the basics of that going on. And now let's go through and add some posts. So the posts, the pillars that I'm going to be adding are going to be at the top of the staircase and in these corners. And the one that I'm going to use is plain column large, which is this one here, which is a nice strong pillar that I can kind of carve into these sections just here. I'm going to flip this on the y-axis. Looks right. Can move this a bit further that way so they match up a little bit nicer. So here I can see that my y-axis isn't really working too well for syncing these up, but that's okay. I can modify it just a little bit. Oops, I've got general scaling on, so turn that off. I want to scale this along the x-axis in this case, so that seems to have worked reasonably well as 1.55. Which makes this one negative 1.55. Great. Don't worry about the strong shadows that we're getting right now. We'll be doing a lighting pass reasonably soon. That looks alright for there. The next thing that I'm going to do is set up the edges. So this is going to involve me kind of having a bit more going on around these areas here. And again, I can go and kind of just use that bridge to form the outskirts all the way from here up and around. Before I go any further on that though, I really want to get this initial groundway in that's going to make up the front section of the castle that we're going to be building. So I'm going to use block 3 as well as block 1. So I'm going to go back to my floors panel for just a second. And I'm going to get the one called block 3. This one. And the reason I'm getting this is if I drag this in, that was a good trick. If I drag this in, you can see that it's a nice circular piece. So I can rotate that 90. Just making sure it's level with the Z height of the rest of it. Alt, drag across. Set my snaps to 100 again. Setting the snaps is just incredibly important. I know it sounds like a tedious thing, but you've really got to make sure you do it. Just otherwise your projects can just be an absolute nightmare to work with down the track. So at the moment those corners don't quite run flush with that, but I'll leave that until it becomes a problem. We've now got what will be the castle wall kind of built up here with some gates and doors. So that's our kind of basics for the layout that will be there. We're just going to keep moving on through each video until the meshing is done.